John from Kentucky. What's up, John? First time caller.
I, I, I love it. I was listening to your program on slavery a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to ask. I would like to study history myself. And by the way, you were talking about music. I love to listen to American Top 40 as well as you do. I love my music. And I was going to ask, weren't there any whites or indentured servants as well as black slavery? I'm not asking you to cause an argument. I just because I want to know. I want to be educated because, and I thought in the Bible days there were Jews and Africans selling their slaves before we came to slave the people 400 years ago. 400 years ago. I'm just curious. I like to know.
John, do you know the difference between indentured servitude and American chattel slavery?
No, I don't. I like to learn. I'm not trying to argue.
Okay,
I just like.
sure, fair enough. Just asking if you knew the difference. So, indentured servitude was basically it was a bad labor contract. It was a horrible labor contract, and oftentimes they were 4 to 7 years, and there were white people who were considered indentured servants. It was a despicable labor contract, oftentimes exploitive, and so on. But it was a contract that ended when it came to American chattel slavery and even white people who were enslaved. With American chattel slavery, that was basically a European invention, and it was slavery based on race, slavery based on color, and also with chattel slavery, unlike indentured servitude, you were enslaved for life, and so were all of your descendants enslaved. Slavery was hereditary, so you were considered property. You were considered livestock. There were some parts of ancient Africa where you would have folks who were enslaved. They would later go on to be tribal leaders. You could still marry. You could still own property. But with American chattel slavery, you weren't able to do that. So basically, with American chattel slavery, slavery was a life sentence written into your skin and then passed on to your kids. That's not how indentured servitude worked. It's much different, much different. And then when you began to legalize whiteness and blackness, look into Bacon's Rebellion, and when you saw white folks and when you saw indentured servants who were white and black folks rising up against the quote unquote planter elite, they began to put all this thing called whiteness into law. So when we talk about slavery among black people in America, we are talking about American chattel slavery. And by the end of the Civil War, I think it was 90% or so, 90% of the black folks who were enslaved in this country, they they were born here. They weren't even part of the transatlantic slave trade. So again, there's several distinctions, but the main one is that that was a horrible, terrible labor contract for indentured servitude. Slavery was for life, and it was passed on to your children, to your descendants. It was hereditary. It was bondage. You were treated like cattle. You were treated like livestock. Much different than indentured servitude. Does that help,
And the
John?
other question I had was the other question is wasn't it slavery in the Bible days when like Joseph was a slave as a Jew or as
Yeah.
Jewish
So
slave?
I just made that distinction for you. In the Bible days, we're not talking about chattel slavery. We're not talking about chattel slavery. Slavery existed all over the world. I've always said that. But the distinction was chattel slavery. Enslaved people uh, were not, again, you're not a slave for life. Your children, because you have kids, do not become slaves. That was a distinct creation from Europeans, a distinct creation, chattel slavery. I mean, imagine if for some reason you had a horrible, horrible job, John. It was a terrible, exploitive job, doing terrible work. Or let's say your grandparents had a horrible job. I don't know, working in coal mines in Kentucky, and they were just enslaved to this job. And then generations later, you were still enslaved to this job, no matter the work that you did to escape. So chattel slavery is much different than slavery at large. You're talking about the Bible days, whatever the case may be. So there is a distinction with American chattel slavery. Do you understand now?
Yes, I do. The other thing I wanted to ask is are do, do, uh, do you would do, are you I originally came from Philadelphia. I moved here. You were talking about Philadelphia when I moved to Ohio, and then I moved to Kentucky in 1988. And I've always been a listener. I'm a sightless man, and I like to enjoy his. I like to listen to black music, white music, all kinds. And I was wondering if you're diversified. I love music,
Am I diversified? What do you mean by that?
all kinds. Do you like all kinds?
Do you think I
You
only
know,
like black music?
I used to think that. I'm not trying to not to be ignorant now. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn. I want to be educated.
Yeah, I mean, I love all types of music. I love everything. I don't limit. I mean, it's impossible if you're black in America to just limit yourself to only black music for the most part. And the majority of white music comes from black artists. You know, the very structure. I mean, if you're a fan of all types of music, the very structure of American music really is blues and spirituals and so on. So yeah, absolutely. I love all types of music as long as it sounds good and it feels good.
Have another comment. I was listening to another channel on. I don't like to plug other channels because I don't know if you're allowed to plug them, but I was listening to the 50s channel, 60s channel, and 70s channel, and I hear a lot of so-called crossovers. But when I listen to Smokey Town, and I love his show very much, when I was listening to Smokey or R&B, the groove, I never hear a pop crossover. Never. And I just don't know if that's because they don't like that kind of music or what. See, I
What do you mean
want to
by
find
you
out. I
never
want.
hear a pop crossover? There are plenty of R&B songs that are pop. There's plenty of R&B songs that are pop. So I don't. Do you mean you never hear white artists? Is that what you're trying to say?
I don't.
Okay, well, that could be that. I would argue with you. I don't know what channel. You ever heard of Tina Marie?
Oh yeah.
Well, then there you go. There you go. That's one artist that you definitely hear crossover. But also, if particular artists aren't doing that, I mean Bobby Caldwell, "What You Won't Do for Love." But if particular artists aren't doing that, they're not going to be in the R&B station. Because I could say the same thing for country. That I don't hear barely any black artists on the country station if they're doing more kind of old school country. So yeah, yeah, interesting. Go ahead. Final comment.
And
Say it again.
I'll call again. I enjoyed the show very much.
Do you understand the distinction between chattel slavery now?
Yes, I do.
Why don't you repeat it back to me to make sure we know that you've learned? What's the distinction?
Oh, I'll try. See, I'm visually impaired, but I'll
It's
try.
okay. We're just talking.
Um,
It's okay, brother.
it's when white indentures were slaves and they couldn't seem to master what it was a horrible thing what they did. They were horrible with the um jobs they had. They make them slaves for life. But
Yeah, it's okay. So again, chattel slavery is different than being an indentured servant. In chattel slavery, American chattel slavery, you are a slave. You are enslaved for life. With with indentured servants, that was a horrible labor contract that would eventually expire. But with with American chattel slavery, you're enslaved for life, and your children are also enslaved. Slavery is hereditary, and in addition to that, you you have no rights. You were considered property. You were considered livestock. You were considered cattle, and that's much different than indentured servants. So I hope you learned something, sir. I thank you for listening. Do I only listen to? Okay. Am I diversified?
Mm.
All due respect, Mr. John, it sounds like you might need to get a bit more diversified. That's what it sounds. With all due respect, and I know that you're impaired, so I understand that, but I would challenge you to be a bit more diversified. But hey, you're listening to the show, so I guess you're. Uh, Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I have nothing for that. With your grace.